Hello everybody, this is JJ from Psychopomp with another Maya tutorial. Today we're going to talk about the content browser in Maya. Let's say you've got a scene where you need a ton of different objects and you need to build a library for set dressing. Basically, you just need a ton of objects that are all set up and ready to go, and you need to start dragging and dropping them into your scene, or you need to start bringing them in one by one so that you can assemble everything according to a camera or according to a set space that you need to build. Well, Maya thankfully has a thing called the content browser. Once upon a time it was called the Visor, but they sort of rebuilt it from the ground up, and now it is called the content browser. So if you go to Window, General Editors, Content Browser, you can navigate to this awesome little new system to basically build presets or a library of presets. And right now I've got these are a good example of all of the old versions. So if you go to like Paint Effects, if you're a Maya veteran, this is pretty recognizable. You can see they've got grass and all sorts of cool stuff that's from the old Paint Effects systems. But you can also make your own. So if you go to favorites, you can build folders, and you can basically create real folders on your system that correspond to whatever you want to build. So in this case, I made a Megascans Maya conversions folder, rocks, and you can see I've got a couple of examples right here that I've been practicing with and building based off of the Megascans library. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Megascans, Megascans is a really robust system, and it's excellent for doing things with, it's really amazing for doing things with materials and textures. And they basically take photogrammetry and they scan objects like real world objects, rebuild them practically so that they work with video game engines or in a movie or film space or TV space. And they basically rebuild the materials and make everything feel as photoreal as possible. So they're not really going for stylized or anything like that, but if you want photoreal, really high quality materials and objects, Megascans is excellent. And they've been building massive libraries with all sorts of great stuff. And they also have been building their software packages like Bridge and Mixer so that you can actually mix and match these together and build your own materials based off of the objects that you have. So you can have something like, this feature on the top of the ceiling. You can actually make it weathered or give it some detail, things like that. Now, full disclosure, I'm not affiliated with Quixel in any way. I am just a 3D artist that has used their work and used their product in production, and I have to say they're really amazing products. So that's my plug to them, but I just want to let you know that I'm not getting paid to say this. Their stuff is really great. So if you want to give it a shot, I highly recommend it. Now the second thing I'm going to bring up is HDRI Haven. And this is actually a really wonderful resource for 3D artists because it's free. Now, they have a Patreon, so if you have the money to donate and help them, that's great. But if you don't, and you're just needing, some HDRIs for your project, they are free, and they are mostly really nice. Now, some of them are really nice, but they're not white balanced. So you got stuff like this, where the white is kind of yellow. And that's kind of a no-no with respect to HDRIs. In my opinion, you should have like a black matte ball as well as a medium gray, and you're kind of lacking. You need to make sure that everything's white balanced correctly. But that all being said, these are all really nice, and you can't beat free. So the fact that all of these are free and readily available, and they go as high as like 16K, I believe, it's pretty amazing. There's also a ton of different locations and styles and things like that, and without really diving into it, you can't really make a good CGI image without having a nice HDR to come with it, because you need those reflections and you need everything to kind of work in tandem, work well together. So those are my plugs for resources. I highly recommend checking them out. And without further ado, let's get back into Maya. So again, if you want to access the content browser, it's Windows, General Editors, Content Browser, and it brings you here, and you can go ahead and go to Favorites, and you can basically make your own library. And I'm going to go ahead and take another rock assembly of these and make a new one. So to show you that process, we are going to start from scratch, completely from scratch, and you can kind of see how this works. So I've got a blank Maya scene. Let's go ahead and drag and drop some stuff in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use this HDRI because I like it, and it's from HDRI Haven, and it tends to work really well, and it also matches the other ones. So by doing that, we can kind of get a similar look. So I'm going to open the Hypershade, and then I'm going to drag and drop this HDR into my workspace. And one nice feature that Maya's been pushing really well is that you have a lot more accessibility and ease of use. And that's a good example of it, where you can just literally drag and drop items in, and they work really well just by default right out of the gate. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to my Arnold tab, and I'm going to make a dome light. Just click that dome light here. You can see it load in the outliner. And then I'm going to middle mouse drag this texture onto the color value. And Arnold is going to generate a text file, and it's going to populate it, and then you can now see it in the viewport here, which is great. You can see we've got this nice HDRI, and it's purely visible. And now we're going to import the 3D mesh. So if I go to my Megascans folder, where I've downloaded this particular object, you can see the preview here. This is basically what we're going to create. I'm going to grab the lowest LOD, LOD 0. And LOD 0 should be the highest quality that was produced in these LODs. And so I'll go ahead and drag and drop that into Maya. There it is. You can see it's a pretty big space, so we'll maybe want to scale this this HDRI up so we can see it a little better. Looks pretty big, huh? Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and add these textures in. You can see the Megascans assets aren't super dense, but their normal maps and other elements really add a lot of detail, and it makes things look really nice. I mean, you can kind of see how the shading is looking there. We'll go ahead and go to display, unlock normals. There you go. Sometimes you'll notice when you do that, you can see how the object was built from another project or from another DCC, digital content creation app. I'll go ahead and do the soften harden edges, and I mostly do this just as a precaution because I don't like it when normals don't look right on surfaces. So well, now that I've done that, the normal map should really take care of all of it, but I do that as a precaution. Okay, so now let's launch the Hypershade. And since we're doing this in Arnold, I'll go ahead and make an AI standard material. So if you type into the search bar AIST, you can find that AI standard surface. And we'll go ahead and select it here and hit input output connections, clean up our scene, and now we're only looking at that material. Now, another thing I like to do to keep things clean is I'll go ahead and select the name of this asset. So we're going to go from here to here. We'll go ahead and select copy, and we're going to go ahead and rename this material to match the name. And if you're working in Unreal or you're working in Unity, I like to do an M underscore at the front, so that way you can search for materials and index them in your engine. So this is kind of just my way of working. I'll do the same thing back here with that standards, that surface shading group. So Control V, make sure that that's still present. And now we have a unique name for this material, so if we import other materials, we're not going to get name conflicts. So it's good to stay organized. It's always good to stay organized. Okay, so now let's go ahead and bring in the textures. So we've got a roughness, we've got a normal, we've got a cavity, a bump, and an albedo. Now, I'm not going to really make use of this bump because we're going to get that bump from our displacement map. And there's two displacements. There's a JPEG and an EXR. Now, JPEGs don't have the same amount of data as an EXR. An EXR is an open EXR format. It basically, it means open exchange, and it stores a lot of really nice data. An EXR typically, if it's used correctly, will hold floating point information for your depth or your height information. And by doing that, it means you'll get really, really fine detail from your height maps when you're trying to displace an object. And that's really important when using displacement, because if you don't have that, what you'll end up with is stair-stepping and problems with your textures, and it just doesn't look good. As far as the bump is concerned, that would be what we would use if the displacement was not being used at all. And you could use it as for additional bump, but I think we're going to be okay. I'll just make sure I use the normal map instead. All right, so we're going to select them, drag, and drop them in. And you can see that they, thanks to Maya getting more user-friendly over the years, you can just drag them, drop them, and they'll automatically generate. Now, if you work with a lot of tileable textures, sometimes it's really nice to simplify the process of these texture maps on a material. One of the ways I like to do that is by not using these place 2D texture nodes for each texture. If you have a tileable, cliff face or something like that, you're not going to want to change the tileable amount from like 10 on every single texture place 2D texture node. It would just be really tedious. You imagine trying to type in 10 for every single map type that you have. Instead, I like to use one map for all of them, one node to rule them all. So I'll bring one over here. I'll name it the name that we have for the object, plus P2D for place 2D texture. And then I'll just go ahead and delete the other ones. I don't need them. So I'll go ahead and delete these. And now we have our maps, and we'll go ahead and bring them up. So we have roughness, we have normal, we have displacement, we have cavity, which is basically, it's kind of like an AO. It's not exactly an ambient occlusion, but it's very similar to an AO map. And it just sort of measures the cavities of your model. It kind of knows where the rocks have sunken in and where there's a lot of depth that needs to be recognized. And then there's the color, albedo color. So what I like to do with the ambient occlusion, or with the ambient occlusion and albedo, is I like to layer them on top of each other. And by doing that, I can add a little bit of punch to the visual, just the color information of the objects. So I'll type in this search bar here, I'll type in layered, and I'll find layered texture. And one nice feature of Arnold is that it actually will play nice with a lot of the Maya nodes, and this is one of the ones that will play nice with. And that means you'll get good feedback in your viewport. And that's important for the sake of these stills, because the viewport is what actually gets recorded. The viewport is what actually gets recorded when you make these thumbnails for the library, not your actual renders. So it's important to kind of play nice with it as best you can. Now, if you were doing other stuff, with USD, this is not going to be USD compliant. That's a whole nother topic. But in the sense of what you could do with Maya natively, this is a great way to build your own library. Okay, so we have the layered textures. We're going to go ahead and middle mouse drag that albedo into here, and we're going to middle mouse drag cavity into here, and we'll get rid of the green by hitting this X here. And you'll see if you hover, you can see the two of them there. So we're going to middle mouse albedo behind cavity, make sure cavity is selected, and then go to over and change it to multiply. Now if you solo this, you can actually see your textures here. So let me go ahead and maximize this, make it a little easier to visualize. Maybe I can even make it bigger so you can see the changes. Okay, so you can see how they built this setup so that it'll work, and you can see that I've soloed it. Now if I change this multiply pattern to 0, take a look at the material or the texture. See how much brighter it gets? That's because I've multiplied the cavity map on top of the albedo. So what I like to do, just to give it a little punch, is I'll do a 0.5, and that sort of adds an extra little layer of shadow on the cavities of these rocks and crevices on the rocks. And you can of course adjust this if you need more or less. And so that right there, I'll select the material and I'll middle mouse layered texture onto the color. And I typically like to turn the weight all the way up to 1, although that's not entirely necessary. It's sort of to taste, but I just want to make sure that we can really visualize that color. Okay, so we'll go ahead and map our out UVs to all of the UV channels here. Kind of got off topic and went in a different direction. Sorry about that, but here we go. We've got all of these going in. And now they all share the same place 2D texture node, which means if I want to change the repeat value, let's say to 5 by 5, you can see all of them will now update accordingly, and that's a really useful thing. But since these are since this object is UV dependent, you're not going to want to do that. You're going to want to keep it at 1. But even still, if you had to adjust this for whatever reason, it's nice to have it available. Okay. All right, so now we'll go ahead and we'll figure out displacement. So displacement is a little different with Arnold. Every renderer handles displacement kind of different, but in general, in Maya, you have to apply displacement as a 3D displacement shader to the shading group. So if you select the shading group, which is this little node right here outside the material, middle mouse drag displacement material on top, it will generate this displacement shader. And the scale, that is how much or how little displacement you want to add to this material. Now the way I personally like to work is I will leave this alone, and I'll make sure that this is an EXR, and I'll make sure that it's set to raw, ignore color space, because you need to make sure that these are interpreted linearly, and I'll discuss more about this in a minute. And then I'll go into the object itself, and I'll make sure that Arnold, under the Arnold group, is set with its subdivision to Catmull Clark. And I'll usually start at 2 or 3 and kind of go from there. And you can adjust the individual object level displacement amount by going to displacement attributes and adjusting the height. So depending on how big the object is, this object's pretty big, so we can probably, be judicious about it. I mean, you can see the grid down here. We can probably just make the height something like 5. But you can get ridiculous with this, just to, just be aware that depending on how large scale your object is, you're going to need to adjust this height information. I believe this is centimeters. So if you're looking at a really large object, you're going to want to make this very, very large just to see the result. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to the hypershade. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll assign this material. Right click, assign material to selection. Incidentally, you can also right click on the object here and say assign existing material, and then you can assign the appropriate material there. I'm gonna hit 6 on the keyboard so we can actually see it in the viewport. And you can see viewport 2.0 has been processing this and trying to figure out how to display it correctly. And if I hit 7 on top of that, we should see this object react to the HDRI. Now we haven't added the other textures yet, so it's pretty ridiculously shiny. So let's fix that right now. Okay, so displacement you're not going to see in the viewport, but you will see it when we render. And that's the kind of thing where you can tweak it to make it appropriate, because displacement can be very tricky. And then with normal, we'll go ahead and double click the material. We'll go down to geometry, and we will middle mouse drag the normal onto bump mapping. Now what this does is this generates a bump 2D texture node, which is a Maya native node. Now you can take a look here and you can see how the node is trying to process this like a height map, and it's creating a really grungy, muddy surface. You have to actually switch it and say use as tangent space normal, and that will actually adjust the output information so that it looks at that texture like a normal map and not like a bump map. Now this isn't necessarily the most appropriate way to use this this actual to use Arnold. There is an AI normal map, but you won't be able to see it in the viewport. So if your objective is to get a nice viewport image of this surface so that you can use it in the context of the library or the content browser, then I would recommend using this method first and then just deleting it and building it using the AI normal map to get the results that you need. So we'll go ahead and we'll set that to tangent space, and we'll make sure that the normal map is set to raw. Right now it's set to sRGB, and if it's not set to raw, it will not be interpreted correctly. And there you go. You can see it totally changed the way that it was interpreted. I hit ignore color space rules because when you import Maya objects that don't have this checked, sometimes it'll reset your color space based off your scene. So this is a way to make sure that that doesn't happen. And as you can see, it's reacting appropriately, and now it actually looks like it's a proper normal map. Okay, so now we've got displacement, we've got normals. Now let's talk about the roughness channel. Now if we go to the roughness map, any kind of map you're using, if it's color information like emissive, self-illumination, reflection, anything like that, you're going to want to use a sRGB color space. And that's basically the color space that you get when you downloaded texture off the internet. Now, if it's a data map, something like a height or a roughness value, specular power, or any kind of normal map or displacement map, you're going to want to use raw, because it needs to be interpreted linearly when it goes through the system. And displacement maps or EXR files or HDR files get interpreted raw by default. So that's kind of nice, but any JPEG won't necessarily. So it's very important to set it to raw for stuff like normal maps and things like that. And then the same thing goes for roughness, because technically it's a data map. It's not necessarily meant to be interpreted as sRGB. Now, if you had sRGB here, it's not the end of the world. It's just going to look a little different, and you'll have to adjust to taste whether or not it's what you're looking for or not. Okay, so if you double click this and you try and, or actually let's just click the material and then middle mouse drag this onto the specular roughness, you'll see that it actually launches the connection editor. And the problem is that the roughness value here is a vector. This is three colors, three float values representing a vector that is R, G, and B. That is trying to be piped into an input that only accepts one float, which is specular roughness here. And because of that, they don't play nice. They can't actually communicate, because you're trying to plug something with three values into something that only accepts one value. So to get around this, Maya has this thing called color balance, the color balance group, and you can basically hit this checkbox. It's a really, really convenient, really important checkbox. Alpha is luminance. So when I click this, that means that this out alpha is that luminance value of this roughness. So if I hit the solo button, you can kind of see what that luminance value looks like. And that means that this is going to get converted into a float instead of an RGB vector. So we'll take that out alpha, and you can see that specular roughness is now available. We'll pipe that in. And instantly you can see how the material is affecting the surface. It's much broader, it's much rougher, and that's definitely the kind of look that we're trying to get. So now I'm going to go ahead and go to the material, and I'm going to change the specularity of the color, because this color just is really heavy-handed and we don't need that much. You know, it should be pretty broad, it shouldn't be so heavy. And so I'm just going to bring that down so we can kind of get a sense of what that looks like. And even then, that may be even a little too heavy-handed. We'll just even bring it down a little more. There we go. Okay, so now we got a nice looking object. This is kind of working, and you can see our material shading network. It's pretty simple. We'll hit close there, so we have everything that we need. And there it is. There is our new object that we're going to create as a library asset. So the next thing I like to do is kind of find a good angle, you know, something that works to help really sell what this is and make it easily recognizable. And oftentimes too, I'll even rotate the HDR to try and find the best angle, something that really, you know, resonates or is easy to read if you're looking at it as a thumbnail. So I'll do that and get some nice contrast there. Okay, so the next step is to double click the name, so that way you copy it, that way you have it, it's easy to grab. Go to File, Save As, and basically just navigate to that folder that you created in the beginning in your content browser. So if I do that, in order to do that for myself here, let's see, I got anything in here? Let's go to my file browser, or file explorer here, and we'll do library, and we'll do Megascans library, and we'll do Maya conversions, and you can see rocks right here. So I'll go ahead and copy that path, paste it, open, and now we have that same thing. So since I'm an idiot, I'm going to go ahead and just use that text to start it, and I'll write it out. Assembly, and it's large, and then the text behind it is TA capital D VF. Okay, now here's the trick. Here's the thing so that you can see what you're doing. There is a save thumbnail checkbox. You just hit capture thumbnail play blast, and it will automatically generate this yellow bounding box. Go ahead and zoom out, rotate, move around, get it in the angle that you like, maximize the space, and hit capture. There it is. Now here's the thing to acknowledge about how this works. So it grabs what's in your viewport, which is great to a certain extent, but it also sucks if you don't have enough information in your textures, or if you're using renderer specific nodes that don't show up in the viewport. So this is why we use that bump 2D, because you can actually see it. But since we had it selected, we're going to want to deselect, so that way we don't actually visually see the object, and that way when we capture it, we can capture it and actually see the object. Now, because it's blending into the environment, that's another issue to consider, and we're going to want to basically address that as well. So what I tend to do is go to Show Lights, and then hit that capture button again. Looks like that light wants to reset, and it will automatically remove that light from the background, and now you have a nice, simple, clean thumbnail, which is very clear as far as what is in the scene and what you're using. So you hit save, you can see the thumbnail lives here, and then you can actually save as. And I tend to like to use Maya ASCII files because they are more compatible with other versions of Maya. Okay, so now that you've done that, you have a thumbnail that represents this project. If you're going to bring it into other projects, you're probably not going to want an extra light in there. So what I like to do at the very end is just delete that light, and then I'll do a 5 and a 6 just to, you know, see everything. Go to File, Save As, and I'll save over that asset one last time. Save as, save yes. And now if you go to Windows, General Editors, Content Browser, and find that same area, you should see your new asset resting inside that folder, and it should be super easy to bring in. So just as a quick example to show you how good this and useful this can be, I'll go ahead and make a new scene, close this out. We'll go ahead and open it back up again. Rocks, you can see here they are. We'll go ahead and do an import. And you can see this one probably has the light source in it. Yep. And then we'll grab this one. Next. And we'll grab this one next. Looks like I got 2 light sources. We don't need them, so I'll delete one. And you can see all of these different things together. Hit 6, 7. We'll go ahead and move these around a little bit. And I'm just really just doing this as for fun, so you can see kind of how this process could work and how fast and easy it would be to now take your scenes to the next level by utilizing these assets and having a nice simple library to keep yourself organized. There you go. Okay, so just as a recap, what we did was we built a Megascans asset and made it ready for a library. So as a recap, basically what we did was we took Megascans assets and we built a material for them, a simple material for Arnold, and then we saved it out as an asset to be used in the content browser. And by doing this, we are able to access it quickly and utilize the content browser as a means to load in set dressing assets very quickly and build your scenes fast and easy inside of Maya and make use of the viewport. We also discussed Megascans website, and we discussed the HDRI Haven website, which is a great resource for artists, freelancers, and others if they want to use HDRIs to test their work. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And if you like this tutorial, please give it a like, subscribe, and of course share it. And then post your comments, post your questions in the comment section, and please let me know what you guys are working on. If you guys have stuff you want to show, or if you want to get feedback on, I'd love to see it. All right, thanks everybody, and have a great day.